In February of 2013, Jessup Reisbeck, an employee of Fox News' Fresno affiliate KMPH, found himself at the scene of an automobile accident. There, he and his cameraman found themselves interviewing a young man who had been at the center of the incident. Sporting long hair, along with a red jumper and gray bandana, the young man, who gave his name as Kai, described in some detail the horrific events that unfolded as he'd been hitchhiking. Kai told the news crew how he'd been hitchhiking through California when he was picked up by a man named Jet Simmons McBride. At first, conversation had remained neutral, but Kai was soon disturbed to discover that Jet Simmons McBride referred to himself as an incarnation of Jesus Christ, and that he could do anything he wanted to. Needless to say, Kai suddenly felt very unsafe in the passenger seat, as he was evidently someone with some serious mental health issues. What's more, McBride would not be easily overpowered if it came to a struggle, as he was a 300-pound behemoth. However, things went from bad to worse when McBride made a frank admission to Kai. McBride told the young hitchhiker that he was a businessman who regularly traveled the globe to ply his trade. He told him that he had been to places where the US dollar could buy you things that were categorically unavailable back home in America. Things like underage girls. Kai was forced to listen as McBride told him the tale of how he'd raped a 14-year-old girl whilst staying in the Virgin Islands. He gleefully explained that the girl was hesitant to lay with him, but that he'd gotten what he'd paid for in the end. Yet as McBride reveled in revealing such awful details to the young hitchhiker, he became distracted and took his eyes off the road. That's when the traffic accident occurred. McBride's vehicle struck another, sending it careening into the path of an unsuspecting pedestrian who was violently pinned against a truck. KMPH later discovered that McBride deliberately targeted the pinned pedestrian because he was black. Screams of agony rang out as Kai jumped into action. He threw himself out of McBride's crashed vehicle with the intention of helping the pinned pedestrian. Other bystanders also sprang into action, rushing over to the scene of the crash in order to help save lives. However, when one smaller woman arrived on the scene and attempted to dial 911 on her cell phone, a crazed Jet Simmons McBride burst from the driver's side, grabbed hold of the woman in a bear hug and began to suffocate her. Kai later described hearing the woman gasping for breath, meekly fighting back against McBride, who was no doubt attempting to kill her. "He could have snapped her neck like a pencil stick," he later says to the camera. Kai knew he had to do something. He unshouldered his backpack and took out a hatchet he kept for self-defense. With the handle tight in his grip, Kai began to strike McBride repeatedly in the back of the head and the axe blade. Over and over and over again, he sent the blunt blade into the back of McBride's skull, until eventually he let go of the woman he in the process of suffocating and began to stagger away with blood pouring from the back of his head. Yet unbelievably, the 300-pound Jet Simmons McBride was still able to stagger away from the scene, despite the immense amount of blood loss he had suffered. There is no doubt that he was in the middle of some kind of psychotic episode, as he was later found masturbating at a nearby middle school before being taken into custody by local police. About the same time the video footage of Kai describing the attack goes viral, he is also taken in custody by police. Yet after a brief interrogation, Kai is released and hailed as a hero by the general public. Hundreds of thousands are endeared to him as they watch him frantically describe his defense of the near-suffocated woman. "I was just like smash," he explains, describing himself hitting McBride with his hatchet. Smash, smash, sumash. Kai's brush with fame led to brief meetings with Jimmy Kimmel, who actually featured Kai himself on his show, telling his audience, "You should never pick up hitchhikers except for that one." Yet in the midst of the otherwise comical footage that was seen by possibly millions of people, there are a few details that, in hindsight, shed a little light on just who was being interviewed. When asked what his second name was, Kai replies, "Don't have one, I don't have anything." When asked where he is from, Kai replies, "Sophia, West Virginia." When asked how old he is, Kai replies, "Can't call it." Why would a person be so reluctant to reveal such personal details but so willing to tell people where he was from? That's because Kai was not in fact from Sophia, West Virginia. That was a bold-faced lie. Kai is actually from Canada, yet there are many more inconsistencies in Kai's life than merely his distorted version of his origins. In May of 2013, an entire continent away from Fresno, California, a New Jersey lawyer was murdered in his home, brutally beaten to death with a blunt object. New Jersey police released details regarding a person of interest related to the case. Those that saw the viral video a few months prior would have been astounded when they saw the face of who was now wanted for such a hideous crime. It was the face of Kai the hitchhiker. Kai was arrested at a Philadelphia Starbucks after a barista recognized him from his wanted poster. The public then became painfully aware of Kai's lies when it was revealed that he was being detained at Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility after authorities determined he was in the U.S. illegally. Kai maintained he fought against the New Jersey lawyer, Joseph Galfi, in self-defense. According to statements he'd given to police, Galfi attempted to rape him after offering Kai a place to stay for the night. Kai stated that the police claimed the sexual encounter was consensual and the murder premeditated. However, Kai said that after the viral video in California, he had no need to have sex with men like Galfi, who Kai described as unattractive, stating, "Do you know how many hot chicks, never mind. Even if I was gay, do you know how many hot guys wanted to fuck me after that shit in California? I'm not even being vain, it's just a fact, like, no offense, but he was not a looker." After the murder charges, the video views increased substantially, increasing its viral reach. Fans of the video, who considered Kai an innocent hero for saving the woman back in Fresno, began to crowdfund his legal fees. But when the jury was asked to decide on charges of self-defense or murder, evidence presented to them overwhelmingly pointed towards outright murder. Kai took the stand in his own defense and was combative during cross-examination. He made an outburst during his defense lawyer's closing arguments, nearly leading to his expulsion from the courtroom. A jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 57 years in prison. He will serve 85% of that term before the possibility of parole, with the judge telling Kai, real name Caleb Lawrence McGilvary, "When you become eligible for parole, you will still be younger than Mr. Galfi was when you murdered him," who was 73 at the time. Kai's story goes to show just how a person can go from hero to villain, all in the swing of an axe. I've spent a large amount of my free time lurking in this sub, and have noticed how many of those here have been able to help other posters who have asked for it. Well, it looks like my turn has come to ask, and I really hope you guys can do the same for me, because I've got myself into a bad spot and don't have a clue what to do about it. The final week of December, a waiter at work offered me the spare bedroom in his apartment. He'd initially used it for storage, but since his girlfriend had moved out, he saw no reason to let it sit empty. That night, my mother and I sat down and talked about it. I'd never considered moving out before. My mom and I had always got along fine, and I saw no reason to take on the expense. Besides, I was a big introvert and didn't do well with others. That's why I took the job as a prep cook. It meant I spent the majority of my shift alone. I'm not autistic or anything like that. My personality most likely spawned from being an only child with few friends. I guess I'd got used to being alone. My decision was to turn down the offer until my mom suggested it may be a good way to draw myself somewhat from my shell. Despite my reluctance, my mother's advice had always served me well. So when I saw the waiter at work the following day, I accepted his offer and we shook hands to seal the deal. By the end of that weekend, I'd finished moving my things into my new room. The waiter, whose name is Devin, seemed a little shocked I had moved in so quickly, but I guess he thought I would wait until after the new year. I saw no reason to wait since Christmas had already passed and I never celebrated the New Year's holiday. He invited me to a party, but like I said, I never saw the point in the whole thing anyway, so I turned down the offer and wished him a good evening and a safe return. The next evening, we had a nice dinner and took the opportunity to get to know each other better. Following dinner, I turned in. At some point in the night, I was awakened by a light banging noise on the wall above my head. I laid still for some time and waited for the noise to occur again, but it didn't. Just before I could close my eyes, a long ray of light stretched across my wall. It looked like a flashlight at first, but when I sat up in my bed and took a peek out of the blinds, I saw a car with its headlights on reversing out of a parking spot directly facing my window. It seemed obvious to me this was the source of the light, so I laid back down and fell asleep soon after. When I saw Devin at work the next day, I mentioned the banging noise in passing and he said he hadn't heard it. He did bring up the light, however, and explained that cars' headlights from the road often reflected off of something into our bedroom windows, and it wasn't anything to worry about. It did seem strange that he brought this up, considering I hadn't mentioned it to him. I just nodded and went about my work, but soon after, I remembered that Devin's bedroom window faced the outer wall of another apartment block. How light could enter his window from that side left me a tad perplexed. But it wasn't an important thing to worry about, and I soon forgot about it. Once my work was done, I drove back to the apartment. I'd undressed and was heading to the shower like I did every day after work, and when I opened my closet, I noticed a few of my shirts had fallen off their hangers and onto the floor. This wasn't a big thing to concern myself with until I saw what appeared to be a shoe print on one of the shirts, like someone had knocked it off the hanger and then stepped on it. The shoe was much larger than mine, and besides that, I didn't wear shoes in the apartment. The carpets had just been steam cleaned, and I wanted to keep them clean as long as possible. Now I was starting to get anxious. I began searching my room to see if any more of my things looked out of place. Nothing else appeared to have been moved, so I wrote it all off as the result of an overactive mind and went about my day. The event that's motivated me to write this post happened this afternoon. I'd finished my prep work early and headed home. When I came in the door and turned down the hall to my room, Devin came out of my room. Although I'm not good at reading others' body language, it was obvious I had surprised him. He asked me what I was doing home so early, and I told him I didn't have much to prep because the previous night had been slow. He fumbled for his words, and before he could say anything, I asked him what he was doing in my room. His answer was this: I misplaced something and I was checking if it was maybe in your room, maybe. I asked what he had lost, and after a few seconds of thought, he said it was a lighter. But it's, not in there, I guess. So, I'm gonna go look in my room some more before I leave for work. Honestly, confused at the whole way the situation unfolded, I just said, okay. Before I could get the whole word out, Devin shot into his room and slammed the door behind him. I immediately went into my room to check and see if anything was missing or moved. Once I'd searched everything else, my dresser and even under my bed, I headed for the closet. Since I'd replaced the shirts that had fallen off their hangers, I'd know if they'd been knocked off again, and believe it or not, one had indeed fallen onto the floor of the closet much like it had before. However, this time, there was a white powder, similar to plaster, dusted on the shoulders of a few other shirts and on the closet floor. This motivated me to search around the closet, under the carpet, the back wall, but nothing caught my eye until I looked up and noticed a square, framed door in the ceiling. I'm still unsure what it is, but I thought if I could stand on something like a footstool, I may be able to open it and see what purpose it serves. At the foot of my bed, I had a wooden chair I use at my desk, so I grabbed it to stand on. I first checked it to make sure it was sturdy enough to hold my body weight, and it seemed to be. I carried it to the closet and stood upon it. As my face got within roughly 1 foot of the door, my nose picked up a foul and nasty smell that I'd never detected before. I started to push on the square board that served as a door, but something in the back of my mind, my instincts perhaps, told me to stop, so I did. I sat down in the chair and tried to make sense of it all, and realized I had no idea what was going on. So, that's why I'm here, posting this story. I'm at a loss as to what I should do or how I should handle the entire situation. I'm very aware of how odd this all is, but I honestly lack the life experience to understand or resolve this problem. So I'm putting the question to you all. What do I do? One of the worst nights of my life was December 28th, 2013. To put it bluntly, and in as few words as possible, a tough Christmas had been rough on my mental health. Then a straight-up shouting match with my mom just kind of finished me off. I stormed out of our family home screaming profanity and swearing they'd never see me again. Yep, I was that petulant teenager. Sure, I'd forgotten my phone and wallet, but was I way too proud to go back and get them? You bet I was. So in my fit of only partially warranted rage, I somehow decided it would be a good idea to try to hitchhike to my friend's house so I could stay the night there. I'd never hitchhiked before. Hell, I don't think I'd even held my thumb out for a cab at that point in my life. But there I was, stood on a stretch of Florida highway, trying to catch the attention of a passing driver. To my surprise, someone actually pulled over pretty quickly, and not the hippie bus rust bucket I'd been visualizing either. It was one of those high-end Chevys, I'm not sure which model, and the guy behind the wheel looked like he had a few dollars. I mean, he was the archetypal rich dad type. Absolutely nothing to indicate that he was anything but nice and well-meaning. "Hop in," he calls out from the open passenger window. I couldn't believe my luck. Like, not only was I about to actually hitchhike for the first time, which felt pretty cool, not gonna lie, but I was about to do so in style. I can't tell the difference between faux leather and the real deal, but when you're in an air-conditioned sedan that still has that new car smell at 17, who cares? I felt grown up as hell. So the guy asks me why I'm hitchhiking, and I'll be honest, I may have given him a totally hopped-up version of events which totally made me out to be the victim. Abusive parents, poor me, blah blah blah. Naturally, he takes his as gospel and starts telling me how his father was an alcoholic, how he sympathized with my situation. I asked him to take me as far down the road as he could, that I had a friend that lived about 30 minutes drive away. He says cool, and down the highway we go. As he's driving, we talk a lot more about family. He pops the glove box and boom, there's a picture of his kids. As I'm looking at his little girls, he starts telling me how important he thinks family is, especially to those of us that come from less than stable backgrounds. Then he said something that seemed completely out of character. We're pulling into a gas station after mentions needing to fill up, continuing the family convo in segments, if that makes any sense. 1 minute he'll stop talking because he needs to focus on a turn or a lane switch, then he carries on. So it was almost out of nowhere when he says something like, "We have to protect our families from our true natures." I didn't know what to say that, not in the moment, so I just kinda stayed quiet as he gets out of the car and starts filling up the tank. I had a few minutes to process those words, and the more I thought about them, the more I realized that hitchhiking might not have been such a good idea. When he gets back in after paying for the gas, there's a few moments of quiet as I'm still trying to work out just what he meant by his last little statement. So I just asked. I straight up asked him what he meant by something so ominous. "It'll be easier if I show you." Ever wonder what it would feel like to tuck and roll out of a moving vehicle? Ever tried to imagine it because you're literally about to do it and you're pretty sure it'd kill you at the speeds you're traveling? Probably not, I hadn't. Not until that moment right there. But somehow I convinced myself that I was just being overly dramatic. Too little too late, huh? So I just stayed in the car. I didn't even ask for him to pull over or anything. Jesus, looking back on it, I wasn't sure what was going through my head at all. Just that I really didn't want to be around this guy anymore. He'd gone from nice and normal to moody and creepy in light speed. "You know, everyone has secrets," he says after pulling into a dark commercial lot and shutting the engine off. So imagine that line spoken as creepily as you can imagine, then double it, and that's what this guy sounded like. I had kept my tone polite up until that point, like I needed this dude to get to my friend's house. But I was all out of cool by then, and I'm literally about to ask him what the hell he's talking about, when he puts his goddamn hand on my thigh. Doesn't just put it there either, he puts his hand there and squeezes. Little side note here, I am not in the least bit homophobic. An older cousin of mine came out as gay long before this ever happened, and aside from a great uncle whose mentality seems to be firmly rooted in the 1920s, everyone in the family just accepted him for who he is. So this isn't me like, "Oh God, it was scary 'cause a gay dude touched me." Because really, I don't even think this guy was even gay. Like I said, he had pictures of his kids, mentioned his wife, even bitched about his in-laws a little during our little family talk. Not that that rules out him being in the closest. Look, what I'm trying to say is, he did what he did because he was a predator. He saw someone vulnerable, who apparently had a rough childhood or family background, and saw someone he could manipulate. It was the look in his eyes, man. Not this vulnerable I like you look. It was like a hunger. That's the only way I can describe it. Like an excitement before a feast. I just hit him. I'm not some tough guy. I don't do MMA. Hell, I don't think I even landed the punch properly. But I threw it hard enough to let him know he was not about to molest me in a dark parking lot in the middle of winter. Then I tried to undo my seatbelt. Tried being the operative word. I pushed the little red button and absolutely nothing happened. No clicking or catching of mechanisms, nothing. You should have seen this guy smile when that happened. I will never, ever forget that look in his eye. Pure predator. I'm not even ashamed to admit that I started screaming for help like a little kid. But ever have a nightmare where you try to scream but your voice keeps kind of catching in your throat? It's so scary because it can literally happen. And it happened to me right there in that dark parking lot. I'm even entirely sure what happened next. I remember slamming my fist into the glass window and it popping all over me. I know I must have gotten the door open somehow too. There were headlights behind us, someone shouting as they intervened. The predatory driver reached under his seat and I thought for a moment that he was about to pull out a gun or something. But then the seatbelt felt kind of loose, so I just kind of rolled out of the car as it sped away. In retrospect, I think the guy had a way to unbuckle it like jury-rigged under his seat, if that makes any sense. I mean, it was tight as hell, and then it just wasn't. Then the cops are there, my rescuer must have called, and I'm just numb. Not only because I couldn't believe I'd almost gotten myself kidnapped or whatever. I mean, I have no idea what that guy was planning for me, other than it wasn't good or innocent. But it was the fact that my own foolish pride, my own self-pity and lies could have been the things really responsible for what could easily have been an untimely death.